Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do my second part of my August wrap up. Next book I want to talk about is an audiobook that I was listening to, and that was Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi. And this is a book that is shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to read it. But I also did read Homegoing by Gyasi a few years ago and I really did enjoy that. This one's a really interesting book. We're following a young girl called Gifty, or a young woman I should say. She is a scientist and we are following her as we learn about kind of her past and how she grew up. She is a child of Ghanaian immigrants into the US. She was brought up in a very, very religious household and she went to church every week. Gifty was very much part of the church. She grew up believing in God and she had a very close relationship with God up until the point around the time that her brother dies of a drug overdose. And we see how that affects, this isn't like a spoiler, this is kind of all like what the book is about. We see how that affects Gifty in terms of her relationship with God and what she thinks of religion, how she kind of sees how her church treats her family as like the only black family in the church as well. So this book is very much it's very introspective. It's just Gifty kind of talking about her life. We talk about her, we see how she grows up. We also see how she is dealing with her mother's mental illness. Her mother is very severely depressed and how she had to deal with that as a child, but how now she's dealing with it as an adult and trying to care for her mother, and how that is affecting her and her life, her work life, her romantic life, and yeah, how she feels about it all, how she has a really hard time kind of opening up to people about it. And I really enjoyed this book. I just thought it was very quiet. It was quite a nice one to listen to, and I just really loved all, I guess, the exploration into growing up quite religious and as an adult kind of coming to terms with maybe what you've grown up believing might not actually be what you believe. It might just be you're being told what to believe. I actually love to know, I would love to see reviews from people who might have grown up in a similar church setting to Gifty and also maybe broke away from the church and how they felt about it. Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it, and the writing was lovely as always. I do think as the story goes I probably preferred Homegoing, but I gave this 3 stars. Really enjoyed it. The audiobook is really good and I recommend. The next book I read was Dawn by Octavia Butler. This is the first book in the Exogenesis series and it's a very interesting book. We are following a character called Lilith who wakes up on a spaceship 250 years after she last remembers being on Earth, and she remembers that Earth had been at war, I think some sort of nuclear war, and basically humankind destroyed itself and almost destroyed Earth as well. And now she has been saved by this particular species of alien who have saved a bunch of humans and have now, she now wakes up on their spaceship and they basically want her to become kind of a group leader of other humans as they retrain them to be able to live on Earth again and repopulate the Earth again. And these humans with Lilith's leadership might be able to do that. So we are following Lilith as she learns about the alien species that has kind of saved them / enslaving them. It's kind of like a two-way thing depending on how you look at it, and her relationship with them and then her relationship with the humans that come after her, and how some of them and how humans have this amazing ability to just destroy themselves and be really, really shit. I really enjoyed this. I think it was just really different to any other book I've read before. It reminded me a little bit of, I guess, it's a little bit Becky Chambers-esque in terms of, I think it's definitely a more gentle sci-fi, though there is definitely a little bit more violence in this, and there is some threats of sexual assault at different times with the humans. There is very much a divide in terms of this book presumes that, human males will be violent and human females will be a bit obedient, I guess, in a way. And we don't really and there's also definitely a very heteronormative thing in this book as well, where it's male and female pairing. There's not a lot of female pairing or male pairing, though the alien species themselves seem to be very much non-binary. So I did love how that was all explored, and particularly the alien non-binary, and how Octavia Butler explored that in a way that feels very natural today, having a lot of people who would feel express their gender identity in that way, but having it in a book that is fairly this was written in the 80s or the 70s, and seeing it in this older text, that was really interesting. I'll definitely read more in this series or trilogy, so I'll definitely be getting the next book at some point from the library just to see where it all goes, but definitely enjoyed this. And I think if you're looking kind of more for an interesting, gentler sci-fi read, this might be it. I read In Other Lands by Rees Brennan. This is a book about a young boy called Elliot, who at 13 years old realises that he is able to travel to somewhere called the Other Lands, which means that he is able to go to a special school in the Other Lands to learn how to survive there, how to like live and survive there. And this is just a really fun fantasy book based around Elliot's years in the Other Lands and his schooling, his friendship, the different like ups and downs that he goes through when he's in the Other Lands, and his perpetual quest to meet a mermaid, which is very important to him. So I'm not going to talk too much about this book because I already have a full review on it, and I will just say that I absolutely love this book, 5 out of 5 stars, and is now one of my favourite books of all time. The next book I read was The Women of Troy by Pat Barker. This is a sequel to Pat Barker's The Silence of Girls, which is where we followed Briseis, who was a slave of Achilles during the Battle of Troy. Women of Troy follows on from that story, but then obviously with this one we are following after the fall of Troy. So we're still following Briseis, but we're following what happens when the Trojan women come into the camp. She kind of Briseis is in a very different position from what she was in when she was first in the camp in the Silence of Girls. She's actually in a much more powerful position now. She's in a position where she's able to look after those girls, the new girls, a lot more. And then we are seeing, I guess, like what they would say is the reaction of the gods to what happened in Troy, and because now the Greeks, like, they've defeated Troy, like Troy is in ruins, all the Trojan men are dead, including the babies, and there's nothing left to do but go home. But they can't go home because the winds won't let them. There's storms, they can't sail because the winds won't let them, and they think it's the gods punishing them for some reason. So we see Briseis, we follow Briseis as she is, I guess, just observing all of that and observing what the kings think they have to do to like appease the gods. I really enjoy this one. Again, it is a much there's not a lot of action in this book because you're following the women in the story, and like all the women can really do in this sense, like they're in the camps, like they're not out on the battlefield. There is no battles anymore in this book anyway because the war is over, and we're just following like what they're going to do next, and we're following Briseis as she kind of looks back at this time in her life and what was happening, the different kind of like politics that was at play at the time between the different kings. But I really enjoyed this. I love like stories set around this time, set around the story of Troy. I think it's so interesting. I love like learning about like the heroes of Troy and the women, like the gods and goddesses, and I just love the fact that this one does turn it a little bit in terms of like Achilles was a hero, but he was also a rapist. Like, you know, he was a great warrior, but he was also someone who like happily kept slaves and happily killed other men and mutilated their bodies. Like, you know, like he wasn't just this great man that everyone like would presume he is from the stories. Like there's two sides to every story. This is definitely a book that shows you those two sides of every story. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I do think it was a little bit like, it felt like there should have been more at the end. I kind of felt like I wanted more at the end. I felt like I didn't get everything that I wanted, but I definitely hope, I really hope that there's going to be a third book in this trilogy that follows Briseis once she gets to wherever she was going after they leave Troy. And yeah, I would just love to know that because I just don't feel like I'm finished with her. I feel like I just want more, so I definitely hope there's another book. The next book I read after that one was a really short novella. It was only like 60 pages, and it was The Witch's Wolves by Ellie MacGregor. This is a book that I've seen on a couple of people's channels. Riley Marie was one of them. Riley Marie tends to be where like I get a lot of my smutty book recommendations, and this book, like, it's just pure smut. It's pure like sexy times and steaminess, and like, you know, if you're looking for a good time, this probably is the book for you. In this book, we're following a girl coming on. This is basically a Little Red Riding Hood retelling in a smutty version, in like a smutty throuple version of Little Red Riding Hood. And we're following a girl coming on who has to run away from her village because of reasons, and she ends up running for her life in these woods. There's something after her, like something really deadly. She knows she is about to lose her life, and then she ends up finding this cottage and she runs to it for safety. And there are two men who live in this cottage who happen to have the appearance of wolves, so they're kind of like wolf men. And she meets these, they take her in, obviously they look after her, but there's like a lot of chemistry going on. These two guys are a couple, but she feels like there's a lot of chemistry. She has a lot of chemistry between the two of them. They have a lot of chemistry together, but they also have chemistry with her, and things happen between them. Like, this was fine. I gave it 3 stars. You know, it was just a smutty time. gave me what I like expected from it, and yeah, it was fine. Like, it wasn't my favourite ever like steamy book that I've read, but it definitely wasn't one of the weirdest either, because I've read some weird smutty books, so this is kind of just run of the mill. After that I finished another audiobook that was Mrs. Death by Salena Godden. This is actually read by the author, so if you like books that are audiobooks that are narrated by the author, this is definitely a good one to do. I think she did a really good job like narrating her own book. She knows exactly the way she wants it to be read. This is a strange book to talk about. Like, it's like, how do I explain this book? We're basically following a young man called Wolf who wants to be a writer, and he meets a woman who's called Mrs. Death, who happens to be Death, and he basically tells her story, and we find out about Mrs. Death and how she takes the appearance of an old black homeless woman because they are the most likely person to be completely looked over, people don't see them, and how that's how she takes on her appearance. And she talks about kind of death and what that means, and humans and life and humankind, and what it means to live and what it means to die, and all those in between. So I really liked this. I think as a narration it was done really well. I do think if you are someone who suffers from anxiety, you might find yourself slightly triggered by the narration of this book, particularly an audiobook, because there's parts of it that are very almost like panicky, and like she talks really fast, and like it actually can get your heart beating a little bit, even for me who wouldn't really suffer from that. There was something I feel like I missed with this book. Some people have given it 5 stars and have really enjoyed it. I was kind of waiting for something to click with me with this book, and I was waiting and it just never really happened. Like, I liked it and it was fine, but I just didn't get anything more from it, and I don't know why. And I just think maybe if I read it on physical, maybe I'll find that, I don't know, or maybe it just like didn't click with me because it's not the book for me, where it is for other people. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I liked it, but yeah, it just didn't, I didn't get the wow factor that I thought I was going to get. Last book I read, I finished yesterday, and that was The Long Afternoon by Inga Vesper. This is another book that I had on my 5 books to read this summer, and this is a like historical mystery. It is set in 1959 in California, and we are following the disappearance of a housewife who one day just completely disappears from her home, and the only thing left in her kitchen is a pool of blood and a beer bottle, and no one else knows where she is. Her children have been left alone, and no one saw people go in and out of her house, and the only people left to kind of figure out what is going on is a detective that is on the case, who has been moved from New York to California. He's like disgraced because of something that went on in a previous investigation, and no one really trusts him, so he's kind of put on this case of this missing housewife. And then we also get the point of view of Ruby, who was the woman's housemaid. So she's a young black girl living in California during a time where like racial tensions are starting to increase. So this is 1959, so it's kind of the start to the middle of the civil rights movement. We see how she's treated by a lot of the other housewives that she works for, and how like badly she is treated and what she has to put up with, and all she wants to do is earn enough money to go to college because she wants to be a teacher. But Joyce, who was the housewife who was missing, was like the only person who was nice to her, and so Ruby really wants to find out what happened to her. So she ends up kind of working with Detective Blank to try and find out what happened to Joyce, and she ends up having to snoop on some of Joyce's neighbours and some of the other women that she works for to try and figure out what was going on and if they actually know anything. This was quite a fun, like enjoyable read. I think this is a really good one for summer because it is also set in the summer in California, so it's kind of like hot and sticky, and you're getting that like sunny feeling and like that dry heat. I really liked Ruby. Was definitely my favourite point of view in this book. I think like she had a lot of things going on in her life. I think she had a lot of depth, and yeah, I just really liked following her. Now this book, like, you know, is written by a white woman, so you know it's not a own voices representation when it comes to being a young black girl. Ruby was very brave, and she was smart, and you know, she wanted to do the right thing, and I think those are always characters that are very easy to root for. And I think as well Detective Blank, or I think his name was Michael or Mick, but Detective Blank as well, like he was a little bit bumbling and not like as good as you would want him to be, and he also was slightly misogynistic at times. That like his inner like misogynistic, like the inner misogynistic male that's in him, like as a 50s 60s male, how it comes out at certain times, and how he really like underestimates a lot of the housewives that he's talking to, and how he kind of just like expects them to tell them the truth, and like they have a lot of secrets themselves, and that was just kind of interesting to follow. And a lot of the times you're like, you know, like you're just a bit of an idiot, but you know, a bumbling one and someone who's trying to do the right thing but still a little bit of an idiot. So overall I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think just for the setting, like a little bit different. I really love reading about like the 50s housewife because I think they're just fascinating, and I'd actually love to read more books like set like around that type of life, I guess. But yeah, just that inner look of like what a 50s housewife was actually feeling and what they were going through and how medicated they actually were. I just really enjoyed that. So I definitely love to read similar types of books in terms of like following a housewife, so in the 60s, 50s and 60s, because I think they're just, yeah, fascinating. So I enjoyed that part of it. So that's everything I read in August. Please let me guys know if you guys have read any of these books, what you thought of them, what you guys are reading, what your favourite book in August was. I would love to know. Thank you guys so much for watching as always. I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.